You tap a card. A stranger on the other side of the planet gets paid. You never see their face. You never speak their language. And yet, you completely trust that the exchange is fair. But the real story of how humans learn to do this is far stranger than a piece of plastic and a chip. For most of human history, there was no such thing as money. No shops, no prices, no strangers doing business. Your ancestors lived in small bands, where everything was shared, not sold. So how did a species built for sharing with people it knew end up trading with total strangers across oceans? The answer starts with a shell, a favor, and a debt that was never meant to be repaid quickly. Begin with the band. For nearly 200,000 years, Homo sapiens lived in groups of a few dozen people. Within that group, there was no trade in the way you understand it today. Anthropologist Marshall Solins studied hunter-gatherer societies and described what he called generalized reciprocity. You gave food to a hungry person, not because they promised something back, but because one day you might be hungry too. There was no ledger, no haggling, no fixed price for a fish or a fire-starting kit. Sharing was simply how the group survived. But something changes the moment you meet someone outside your band. A stranger has no history with you, no shared memory, no guarantee they will ever help you again. And yet, archaeological evidence shows that even tens of thousands of years ago, humans were already exchanging goods across huge distances with people they barely knew. Shell beads from the coast have been found hundreds of miles inland. Obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for sharp tools, has been traced from a single quarry to sites scattered across ancient landscapes. Far from that source, someone carried it, someone traded it, and they did this long before money, writing, or even permanent settlements. So how do you get two strangers from two different bands to trust each other enough to trade? Anthropologist Marcel Mauss studied this question by examining gift economies across many cultures and found something counterintuitive. Trade often did not begin as trade at all. It began as gift giving. One group would offer something valuable to another, not expecting an immediate exchange, but creating an obligation, a debt of honor. The receiving group now owed something back at some future point of roughly equal value. This slow, ongoing cycle of gifts and counter-gifts built trust between strangers over months or years, long before any formal marketplace existed. This might sound inefficient to you, but think about what it actually solved. Trading with a stranger is dangerous. You cannot be sure they will not simply take your goods and vanish. A gift cycle solved this by stretching the exchange out over time, forcing both sides to keep showing up, keep proving their reliability, one exchange at a time. Trust was not assumed. It was built slowly, transaction by transaction, the same way trust between two people is built today. You have probably been taught a simple story about how trade began. First, there was barter, people swapping a chicken for a sack of grain, and eventually barter became too clumsy, so humans invented money to replace it. It is a tidy story. It is also, according to the evidence, mostly wrong. Anthropologist David Graeber spent years searching for a single documented society that ran primarily on direct barter between strangers, the way the textbook story describes, and found almost no evidence it ever worked that way at scale. Barter did happen, but usually between strangers who had no ongoing relationship and no other choice, not as the normal way neighbors or trading partners dealt with each other. What actually held early economies together, Graeber argued, was not barter, but debt. If you needed a tool your neighbor had, you did not haggle over an even trade on the spot. You simply took it with the understanding that you owed something back at some point of some rough value. Nobody kept a precise tally. The whole system ran on memory, reputation, and the quiet expectation that debts would eventually balance out. This is strikingly similar to Mauss's gift cycles. Both describe an economy built on trust stretched across time, not an economy built on instant, calculated exchange. Why does this matter? Because it reframes what trade actually is. Trade was never simply the swapping of physical goods. It was, from the very beginning, a technology for managing trust and obligation between people who could not simply rely on kinship or friendship to guarantee fairness. Long before anyone minted a coin, your ancestors had already invented the deeper IDE that makes an economy possible. The idea that a favor given today creates a bond that persists into the future. Then agriculture changed the scale of everything. Around 12,000 years ago, farming produced surplus food for the first time in human history. A farmer might grow more wheat than his family could eat in a season. A herder might raise more animals than his household needed. Suddenly, there was something to exchange, beyond friendship and favors. There was surplus. And surplus needed a system. This is where things get genuinely clever. Early trade economies faced a problem. Economists now call the double coincidence of wants. If you have extra grain and want a goat, you need to find someone who has an extra goat and specifically wants your grain at the same time in the same place. That is a difficult coincidence to arrange constantly. Economic historian Karl Polanyi studied ancient economies and argued that many early societies solved this not through open markets, but through what he called redistribution. A central authority, often a temple or a chief, would collect surplus goods from everyone and then redistribute them according to need or status. You did not need to find your perfect trading partner. You simply gave your surplus to the center, and the center gave back what you needed. Temples in ancient Mesopotamia functioned almost like massive early banks. Grain, livestock, and goods flowed in, tracked carefully by scribes using some of the earliest writing systems ever discovered. In fact, many historians now believe that writing itself was invented not for poetry or storytelling, but for keeping track of trade. Clay tablets from Uruk, dating back over 5,000 years, are covered in tallies of sheep, barley, and beer rations. Your ancestors invented written language, largely to solve an accounting problem. Picture what this actually looked like. A farmer would deliver a portion of his harvest to the temple storehouse. A scribe would press a symbol into wet clay, recording exactly how much grain came in and from whom. Months later, when that farmer needed tools or oil or help during a poor harvest, the temple could draw on its stores and give some back. The temple was not simply a religious building. It was a warehouse, a ledger, and an early form of insurance, all built around a god's authority to make sure nobody dared cheat the system. Trust in an invisible deity turned out to be a remarkably effective way to make thousands of strangers cooperate honestly. This model spread far beyond Mesopotamia. Similar redistribution economies appear in early Egypt, where grain was stored in state, granaries against future famine, and in parts of the ancient Andes, where the Inca state collected goods and labor and redistributed them without using money at all. Different continents, different centuries. And yet the same basic solution kept reappearing. A trusted central authority, standing in for the personal relationships that used to hold small bands together. Eventually, something even stranger emerged, money that was not food at all. Cowrie shells, salt, cattle, bronze rings. Each of these became what economists call a medium of exchange, something valuable enough, portable enough, and trusted enough that people would accept it even if they personally had no use for it. Nobody wanted to eat a cowrie shell, but everyone agreed it represented value, and that agreement was enough to make it functionally real. Cowrie shells traveled an especially astonishing distance. Harvested from the shallow waters of the Indian Ocean, they turn up in archaeological sites across Africa, China, and parts of ancient Europe, thousands of miles from where they were collected. A shell with no nutritional value and no practical use became one of the most widely accepted currencies in human history, simply because enough communities across enough centuries kept agreeing it meant something. Salt did something similar in parts of Africa and the Roman world, valuable enough that some historians suggest the word salary descends from soldiers once being paid partly in salt. What connects a shell in West Africa, a grain tally in Uruk, and a coin in ancient Rome is not the material, it is the agreement. Every one of these objects only functioned because a community collectively decided to trust it and kept trusting it day after day, transaction after transaction. Break that trust, and the object instantly becomes worthless again. A handful of shells is only money for as long as everyone around you keeps believing it is. This is the part that should genuinely surprise you. Money has never been valuable because of what it physically is. A shell has no calories. A coin cannot build a house. Money works purely because a large group of strangers all agree at the same time to believe in it. Your ancestors did not invent trade by inventing objects. They invented trade by inventing shared belief, a kind of trust so large that it could stretch across people who had never met and never would. Consider what this means about your own life today. Every time you use a card, a coin, or a banknote, you are participating in the exact same ancient trick. Your ancestors developed around a shell or a cowrie. You are trusting a symbol, not a person. And that symbol only works because millions of strangers, most of whom you will never meet, have quietly agreed to honor it too. Trade, in other words, was never really about objects moving from hand to hand. It was about solving the oldest problem your species has ever faced. How do you cooperate with someone you do not know, cannot verify, and may never see again? Your ancestors solved it first with gifts, then with grain stored in temples, then with shells and metal that meant nothing on their own, but everything once enough people believed in them together. So the next time you tap a card without a second thought, remember what you are really doing. You are extending trust across a distance. Your ancient brain was never built to handle using a trick your ancestors spent tens of thousands of years perfecting. It began with a shell carried hundreds of miles by someone whose name you will never know. It ends, today, with a tap that a stranger on the other side of the planet somehow trusts completely.